In our last class, Make Straight the Path, Explaining the Faith, we touched on the basic tenets of good apologetics, namely, holiness, being centered on the love of God and His truth, charity, act in love, unity, find common ground, study, schedule regular study time, pace your discussions, focus, stick to main topics, Eucharist and other prudent choices, and interpretation. Don't accept non-Catholic interpretations, but present them in proper context. Canon of the Bible, that you point out that the Church existed 350 years before the canon of Scripture was compiled. And history, all Church Fathers were Catholic from the start, and many non-Catholic views were unheard of until 1500 years after Christ established His Church. And knowledge, have your catechism handy, and if unsure, get back later with the answer. Then there was temper, start and finish with prayer, practice patience, stop the discussion if abuse arises. Expertise. Expertise was not necessary, just present what you know. Be polite and show concern. And finally, caution. Use common sense. So let's begin with a little logic regarding the Christian faith in general. Frenchman Blaise Pascal, named after Saint Blaise, bishop and martyr who died around 316, was a child prodigy. He was a mathematician, a physicist, an inventor, a writer, and a Christian philosopher, and he died in 1662 at the tender age of 39. Some credit to him the invention of the computer. In fact, a Pascaline, as it was called, was a type of calculator. Pascal approached disbelief with an argument that came to be known as Pascal's wager. His argument builds upon the question, what if you're wrong? A wager that every professional gambler who studies odds would be familiar. It's a theory of possibility. Taking war for the point of illustration, even though you might have a completely just cause for engaging in battle, if you can't win, if you don't have the resources, it's really not a just war, because all your soldiers would be killed. Now, let's apply Pascal's wager to belief in God. Either God is or God is not. There's no in-between. It's a binary situation. Likening belief to a game, of course, merely for the sake of demonstration because it's not a game, Pascal would explain that the game being played is simply heads or tails. One or the other will end up, but not both, nor neither. Every single human must play and must wager. In other words, you must make a choice. Being that this is actually the case, yes folks, it's reality, you have to look at the odds. Let's first weight the odds that God exists. If you win, that is, God exists, you gain all. And if you lose because you believed God exists but He really doesn't, well, you lose nothing. You die one day like everyone else and poof, you're gone. Reason would tell you to wager without hesitation that God exists. You stake what is finite, your opinion while you're alive, for infinite winnings, eternal happiness with your Creator. Interestingly, despite good logic, some simply cannot believe. Such persons should, then, at least recognize their inability to believe with the intent of correcting the logic error of unbelief. In other words, a healthy intellect would at least investigate the matter just in case such a thing as eternal happiness is possible. Pascal's wager goes like this. If you believe in God and you're right, infinite gain is your reward. If you believe in God and you're wrong, nothing happens. But if you don't believe in God and you're right, nothing happens. If you don't believe in God and you're wrong, infinite loss. Let's say that God doesn't exist. What do you get? Well, you can live a life of sexual immorality. You can murder, lie, steal, live a selfish life, or perhaps even try to be a good person. That is good according to your own standards, of course. But you wouldn't have to worry about the consequence of your behavior after you die, which, by the way, might bother those who feel unjustly rewarded after trying to lead a good life. In the end, poof, you're gone, and the reward would be simply not having had Christian morals in the way of what you wanted. Now, if God does exist, you can still do all those things, but when you die, you'll stand before God in judgment, along with, unfortunately, even believers who ignored God, as Jesus warned, quote, "Not everyone who says to me, 'Lord, Lord,' shall enter the kingdom of heaven, but he who does God's will." On that day, many will say, "Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name and cast out demons and do mighty works in your name?" Matthew 7:22. To whom Jesus will solemnly declare, "I never knew you. Depart from me, you evildoers." Matthew 7:23. And also Luke 13:27, as foreshadowed in Psalm 6, verse 6, and Psalm 119, verse 115. You think 30 years is a long time to pay off a mortgage debt? Try eternity for refusing God's free offer to forgive, heal, and ultimately perfect you, should you allow yourself to be improved upon, as nothing imperfect can enter heaven, or it wouldn't be heaven, would it? So imagine a healthy young man going to Vegas to gamble with his spare cash. And let's say that the most he can win is $20,000. But if he loses everything he makes until he dies, the rest of his life. Considering the lad might happen to live to 99, who in their right mind would want to play such a game? But gambling with one's life and soul involves the risk of infinitely more loss, eternity. Now, say God doesn't exist, yet your life of restraint contained, well, none of the scandalous thrills found in the celebrity tabloids. Then one day, poof, you're gone. Nothing but nothingness. And you don't know the difference. What did you give up? You gave up what you may have imagined would bring you happiness. And I say imagined because you, like everyone else, is incapable of charting their own course to bliss and fulfillment. Just the fact that you'll experience pain, loss, sickness, and death is enough to take the shine off anyone's utopia. In fact, natural reason has shown us that those who anticipate eternity with God live happier lives. This is particularly evident amidst times of suffering, trial, or loss. An atheist asked me, if Christianity really believed in all this heaven stuff, they'd want to kill themselves to be with God, wouldn't they? A grossly misguided understanding of the value and dignity of human life might fall into such heresy, but that is certainly not church teaching. God created each of us with purpose, even knowing our names before we are conceived. And we are called to live lives that reflect our gratitude and trust in Him. Interestingly, Atheist apologist Richard Dawkins usually responds to such arguments with something along the lines of, well, what if you're wrong? Anyone could be wrong about anything, even pink flying elephants. But he's missing the point. So what if we are, as we already covered? To keep in line with his own position and the rules of logic, a fair response from Dawkins would have been, yes, if I am wrong, and God does exist, and therefore heaven and hell as God warns, then I, being an atheist, will not go to heaven but to hell. Yet, rather than respond with logic, Dawkins mocks that the reason Christians have fallen for Christianity is because they have been raised that way. I'll give him that, as educated parents tend to have school children. Moral parents commonly raise good citizens, while criminals often breed troublemakers. Dawkins goes on that if you were brought up in India, well, you'd believe in Buddha, or in ancient Greek, the Greek gods, or in a certain area of the Middle East, Mohammed. However, he isn't really addressing the question, but rather mocking his Christian opponent by parading a list of religious beliefs, often adding that atheism is growing. Well, a claim that he doesn't prove because it's not true. He then follows with the erroneous assumption that Christian faith is merely cultural, completely disregarding the countless recorded examples of men, women, and children throughout history who became Christians despite their hostile surroundings, their culture, and near impossible odds. As Pascal's argument neither compels or convinces Dawkins, one can't help but wonder why Dawkins and other atheists don't simply respond with, bring it on! That is, the hell they claim doesn't exist. As evidenced by Dawkins' peculiar emotional reasoning, as discussed in a previous segment, psychologists have shown that what we call the heart has reasons that the mind does not truly understand. In other words, there's what's going on in the family, and then there's what's really going on, if you know what I mean. So in this segment, we covered what has come to be known as Pascal's wager, demonstrating the illogical reasoning in gambling away in this life one's hope for eternity with God in the next. Using reason and a bit of fascinating science, our next session finalizes the basic structure upon which we may hang our apologetic specifics of Catholicism. You're in for a real treat. God bless.